So welcome back to the Talent Whisperer podcast. It's your host, Chipochedu. And today's guest is someone I've hugely admired for a very long time. And when I was starting this podcast, I had a list of like dream guests. And you were one of them. So this is like a very full circle moment for me.
Oh, wonderful. It's great to be here.
So yeah, welcome, Linda. I'll read a bit about Linda. So I'll talk about you in the third person as much as you're here. So Linda Kasonde is a lawyer and a civil rights activist. She was the first female president of the Law Association of Zambia. And this is the role that thrusts her into political leadership and the public eye. After this role, Linda founded LCK Chambers and the Chapter 1 Foundation, both of which sought to promote human rights and the rule of law in Zambia. Mm-hmm. Prior to this, Linda was the first female partner of an established and predominantly male law firm, and she did this only at the age of 31. Linda has been practicing law for over 20 years and has been recognized both locally and internationally. There were so many awards. I wanted to name a few, but I couldn't pick. I couldn't rank them, so I was like, okay, we'll just say, awards. Now we are officially adding published author to the long list of achievements. So Linda, welcome to the Talent Whisperer podcast.
Thank
really
you,
honored
Chipo.
to have you.
I'm really delighted to be here. And just a slight correction there.
Okay.
I was not the first female partner in a male firm. I was the first one to be, if you like, promoted to that position of named partner.
Okay.
Yeah, there are other female-led firms that are in their own name, etc.
Yes.
And I did it a month before my 31st birthday.
Oh, yeah. How was that? Wait, was it something that you were you had down as like a goal, or did it just happen?
I think I'm just a very driven person.
Yeah.
So as Oprah likes to say, and you sound like an Oprah fan.
Huge.
When you do your best, people will notice.
Yeah.
So essentially that.
It's actually
but
that.
It didn't stop all kinds of rumors, which I have to say I only heard after I left the firm that there was all kinds of underhanded methods of getting to the top. I was just like, wow,
And that's always like. People always try to rationalize. I think we're still in an age or an era where people always try to rationalize women ascending to leadership positions, either young or even no matter at what age. As long as they ascend to a leadership position, there's always like buts.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Very unfortunate, but there you have it.
Anyway, I'm really excited to have you on the show, and for me. I think why this is a big deal for me is that it was, at a time that I've always been very ambitious as well. And, it hasn't always been, you look up to people like Oprah. We always had these people that we looked up to, Black American women and women all over the world. But you could never really find local women. Up until now, we have a lot more people coming up. But for me, when I sort of started seeing you ascend to leadership positions, you became one of those people that made it very tangible, and also led me to becoming a lot more unapologetic about being in leadership. So I thought we should start with that because this is kind of a big deal for me.
Oh, thank you very much. I mean, I always say. And I talk about it in my book, that representation really does matter.
It really does matter.
So, for example, when I was elected as LA's president, being the first female, there was nobody who I could turn to who knew exactly what my experience as a woman in this position was. And so I found myself looking to people like Tudi Madonsela in South Africa, who I finally managed to meet and bring to Zambia for our the last LA's conference that I was president of. Yeah, I was like, wow. For me, that was like, oh my gosh. So, and her and Oprah, and maybe to some extent Michelle Obama, that came a bit later, in the sense that they represented Black excellence for me. And that is what I aspire to and try to model for other people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, You're doing a great job.
Thank you.
So we always like to go back because we always like try to take it back to childhood on this podcast, because I've found that there's normally a connection, like everything is kind of connected, you know, who you were as a kid and who you end up as an adult. It gets muddled along the way, but I find that childhood can be very telling. So what were you like as a child? You know, were there any signs you'd be doing exactly what you're doing today? And also, when did the leadership traits start to show up?
I think there were kind of two phases to me as a child. So me in primary school, I was very sort of precocious, obstinate, and, you know, doing my own thing. But I think that kind of got diluted when I went to secondary school. I went to boarding school when I was 11. And I guess the pressures and awkwardness of growing up and kind of, if you like, dimmed my light. And it's actually through a conversation that I had with somebody when I was doing my sixth form, IB, in Swaziland. So it was actually the first year of the sixth form, and the Student Representative Council elections had come around. And it was tradition that the leadership of this SRC was made up of the IB1 candidates. And so a classmate asked me, are you going to stand in this election? And I said, of course not. Nobody will vote for me. And he was like, what? He says, that's a really lousy attitude.
Wow.
And I was like, really? I mean, I genuinely didn't think that I could get elected.
Yeah.
But that conversation really made an impression on me. And so several years later, so I was about 18 when we had that, no, maybe 17, and I had that conversation with him. And I only tried for my first leadership position as an ordinary council member of LAS, gosh, I must have been 30 or 29 at the time. So yeah, it had a lasting impression on me and basically taught me that putting yourself forward is actually the biggest step towards any kind of leadership position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that kind of like planted a seed. Did that kind of remain?
It did. It really did.
Remain with you.
Yeah. I mean, also there was, like I said, putting yourself. The biggest lesson I learned on this leadership journey was when I decided to stand for the position of Honorary Secretary of the Law Association of Zambia. I was standing against a candidate who was my senior by a good, 5+ years. Yeah. He was much more well known in the profession, having studied here in Zambia, and I hadn't. So when I stood, I asked around, what do you think of me standing? And I asked somebody who was roughly of the same age as this gentleman. And she said, I've asked like 10 of my friends and nobody knows who you are. I was like, wow. And then I talked to another friend of mine, Augustine, and he lent me his book called Dare to Fail. And there's a story in there.
A book that he wrote?
No, a story written by somebody else called Billy Lim. And there's a story in there of, to sum it up, that persistence pays. So I decided to put my name forward. I campaigned hard and I beat that candidate by a ratio of 2-to-1 votes.
What?
I was like,
at that point you're like,
I was like, this thing, you just gotta go there and put yourself out there.
Yeah. And your decision to study law, what at that point, sixth form, and you said you didn't study here in Zambia, so I'm assuming you studied outside the country. But what was that like? Did you know at the time that you wanted to be a lawyer? Or were you still kind of like, what was your decision making? Was it just like a knowing? Was it influenced from, there was the 3 careers, there was lawyer, doctor, what was the decision making like? And do you feel like you ended up exactly where you were supposed to end up?
So I stumbled into the law, I guess, because of the lawyer-doctor thing, but I was more inclined towards social sciences. And when I was a child, my dad used to say to me, I think you could become a journalist. But my mother, who was far more conservative in terms of professions,
Yeah.
said to my sister and I, as women, it's important for you to have a profession because whatever happens to you, you will always have that thing to fall back on because you'll always be that thing. So I think sort of subconsciously, I liked history and English when I was at school. So I said, okay, I could do law. So I started it and only really began to enjoy it probably in my second year when I took a course on civil liberties, which is essentially human rights. So I said,
So you started generally, like a general social science?
First, no. In the UK, you go into law directly. There's no sort of preliminary year.
Yeah. Like we have humanities here, and then you transition.
So I went straight into law school, and I firmly believe that things always work out the way they should, and that is guided by my faith. And I also, when I look back, some of the things I went through, I'm like, wow.
Hindsight is such a funny thing. You always like when you're in it, and then you look back at how everything worked out exactly how it should. You're like, what? But why didn't I? How could I not see this? Like, you know, and it always does. So you made, like we said before, you made partner at 31, sorry, which is when I first heard about you. I think I was always curious. It was one of the first careers, no, maybe third career or second, I don't know. I thought about becoming a lawyer because I was told, you talk a lot. You have what it takes. But I think I ended up exactly where I was supposed to end up. But when you look back at your journey, were there any particular actions, I guess, or a way of being, or how you showed up at work? What are the things that, in hindsight, led you to getting promoted to such a position when so young, especially like in a male-dominated field, and even just a company that that particular firm didn't have a lot of, like you said, you're the first partner in that firm, first female partner in that firm. So when you look back, what are some of the things that you think you either did differently, or how did you show up? What led to that promotion and being seen as well?
I definitely think it has something to do with my upbringing because I have one brother and one sister, and we were raised as equals. Like everybody did the same things in the house, the chores, the whether it was cooking, whether it was anything else. And also the school I went to, also it never occurred to me that I could be less than a man in any regard. For example, I played football when I was at school, all the way up to university, in fact. I took it for granted that people are equal. And it's only when I started interacting, when I came back and saw how dominant patriarchy is as a narrative in our society, that I was like, oh, okay. I didn't doubt my own worth. And I knew if I worked hard, I could do what I wanted to do and achieve what I wanted to achieve. So I think that stood me in good stead.
Yeah. Yeah. And so first of all, you show up as an equal. I think that's a big thing. But when it comes to, I think you always kind of get to this question a lot when you get to a senior position really early. I find that I get that question because of my profession being in HR. I get that question a lot from people, like, how do I get there really early? Like, how do I I want to be a young CEO. And you say, okay, consistency, hard work, but a lot of people are convinced there's like a secret sauce. And it's a bit difficult to speak to sometimes, because I got to a senior position really early. So when I think back as to what I did, Yeah, consistency, hard work, I guess not feeling good enough for the position. But it always seems a bit wishy. Like when you tell people, they feel like you're saying something wishy-washy, right? And I wanted to hear how much of that you feel played a role, because I think it's always nice when people hear it from a lot of people that that level of self-belief is what allows you to put your hand up or maybe see that there's a possibility that this can be done, and then you find yourself doing it. So how would you put it in a way, not that in a way that's not, it can sound wishy-washy, but how much of that do you think plays a role for people who are trying to get somewhere pretty young, or yes, there's the hard work, there's all the other things, but the concept of self-belief, how much has that showed up, not just in that you being like, becoming a partner so young, but how much does that show up for you when you find yourself achieving what you're achieving? Yeah.
Well, I'd say there are two things that probably led to me attaining leadership positions, high leadership positions early. And I think, firstly, I went above and beyond what was the basic expected. So I worked longer hours and diligently. But on the softer side, on the soft skills side, the issue of self-belief, it's something that it's a muscle you build over time. It didn't just happen. I didn't always have that strong self-belief. And I think the most influential person with regards to that journey of self-belief is my friend Natasha Chumia. So I think I was 29 because I became partner at the law firm first, ordinary partner, and then I was elevated to named partner. So my name was on the door. So when I became partner, she said to me, you know what, Linda, you've been working at this firm for a really long time, and I think you've put in the work. Why don't you ask them to be made partner? I was like, really? Can I do that?
Can I do that?
Yeah. So I actually went and I asked them, and they said, oh yeah, sure. No qualms.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, okay. And then again, a couple of years later, so I was now just about to turn 30, she told me that I should ask to become a named partner, by which time I think I'd been there for over 10 years, I believe. And again, I asked, they thought about it, and they said yes. So there's an element of luck in that respect. Like maybe somebody believed in me, and that helped me believe in myself. And also, the partners I was working with at my law firm were also very instrumental in allowing me to become who I've become, because they never showed any gender bias. It was all about the performance. What are you bringing to the table? And they allowed me to do things outside of the law firm, such as volunteering for LAS committees and eventually ascending to positions on the council. So that all of those things factored into how I became who I am.
Yeah, that makes sense. People seeing you, I think, is also a big element. I think it showed up when you're in sixth form. Someone said, why don't you run, planted the seed, and then later you talk about your friend who's also instrumental. So sometimes it also takes someone seeing it and pointing it out.
Absolutely. Again, like I said earlier, my favorite quote from, one of my favorite quotes from Oprah, when you do your best, people will notice.
People will notice, so a lot of women tend to shy away from leadership positions that put them in the spotlight, especially, right? And this is for fear of being judged or public humiliation, especially in the political space. I mean, we could name a lot of names of women that have, held leadership positions in politics, and it somehow always feels like the things that they get judged on are always slightly more humiliating. It's always things that have nothing to do with the work. So it becomes very scary to ascend to leadership positions. And this didn't stop you, you know. I think your book actually refers to a certain political period where I think you were quite active. Would you say, if I would use the word right, you are like an activist in that?
Yes,
Yes,
I call myself
you are
an
an
activist,
activist. Yes. So, and I would remember seeing articles, you know, seeing you on Twitter, seeing you speak out, and it's not, it has never been the easiest space, but especially for women, right? And so, how did you overcome fears that you might have had to take on the space anyway and speak out at a time where people that were speaking out were also just not normally safe? So there was the aspect of being dragged publicly, the humiliation, the things that, you know, they would say about women in that sphere. And then there's also the safety aspect of fearing for, I guess at some point, even just your life or your livelihood, you know. How did you overcome the fear? Like what's that thing that drove you to say, I'm going to do this anyway?
I'd say it's having the courage of your convictions. So I have a very strong sense of doing the right thing, as I see it, according to my values, according to my faith. That's a very strong theme in my life. And also, just to say, I mean, there's no magic bullet. It's not that I don't feel fear. Like they say, it's feel the fear and do it anyway,
Do it
right?
anyway, yeah.
Dr. Maya Angelou used to say that courage is the highest virtue because without it, you can't do any other virtue consistently.
Yes.
So courage is the bare minimum in order to be able to stand up for what you believe in.
Yeah. To stand up for anything. And do you have any, and this is a very like vague question, but when I was asking it, I thought about it to say, do you have any thoughts on what we can do better when we see women as you know, taking a chance in political spaces, even in the corporate space, you know? Something that has always stuck with me, I remember going to this event once, and there was a woman that she's, you know, one of the more dominant like female leaders in, you know, the corporate space, and her name was announced for something, and she came to give like a keynote, and someone at the table asked, oh, you know, she's done so well. And they said, but is she married? Like in that moment, it just, like it just took away everything, or it should justify why she's done so well. And she wasn't married. So, you know, that has just never left me. I think I was quite young when I was exposed to that, you know, to that statement. And I thought to myself, we have to do better. Like in that moment, this woman has worked so hard. We should just like celebrate or be inspired or support her because she's doing this to even do better. You know, so do you have any thoughts? And this is just because we're on a platform and it would be helpful. And this is for both men and women because that statement came from a woman. What can we do better to improve the environment where even the girls growing up and even the women right now that are shying away from positions don't feel too afraid to be judged harshly because maybe of their past or because they're not married or because they might be married but will still get judged to say, but she's always working, you know. There'll always be a thing. So what can we do better as individuals?
Well, I think firstly, the narrative we have to challenge is that women are some kind of a fragile object whose virtue, in terms of, I don't know how else to put it, but your I guess your sexuality is somehow linked to you being a good person or a respectable person in a way that men are not measured in the same way. So I'm not advocating for people to go out there and you know, engage in all manner of vices.
Yeah.
I'm just saying that there is definitely a higher standard for women, and I think people should just be conscious of it in terms of not judging women for things that are irrelevant for men.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, in terms of what you mentioned about, oh, is she married?
Yeah.
I remember once going to an event, I think it was something around TED or something. And I was in a group of people who'd come to discuss the TED talk that had been screened.
Yep.
And one of them said something like, yeah, if Linda, no wonder Linda speaks like that, because if she were married, somehow she wouldn't be able to express herself in that way. I'm just paraphrasing what was said. And the notion that somehow women need to be tamed and contained in order to be virtuous, good women is something of a narrative that must be challenged, because there's so much more to womanhood than, for example, just being married or even having children, although these are wonderful things and must be celebrated when they do happen. But there's so much more to individuals than just that. And I don't think we should be ashamed of not meeting people's sort of societal aspirations for you. I think everybody as an individual should be measured by their values, their principles, and what they bring to the table. I think that's pretty much
That's a really good answer, and that it's okay to want different.
Exactly. Yes.
You know, that's something I've also just personally struggled with. I think I'm a bit more comfortable now, but I used to struggle with the level of my ambition or how much I wanted different, and how somehow like it was just never a thought. Like, you know, when you get that point where your friends are like getting married and settling down and having children, like I loved it. I loved being there. You know, I've loved the experience. You know, 27 dresses of being a bridesmaid and all those things. But I just wasn't driven by it. Just didn't feel like it was for me. And I remember wanting it, like, oh, I should want it. I should want it, but nothing. I should want it, but nothing, you know? And I think I'm glad I somehow honored that, even though it was always a bit of a push and pull in my brain, because now that I'm kind of growing up and I'm starting to do all these other things and I'm starting to feel a little more, you know, like, oh, maybe this is how I might want to do this, you know, to if it's getting married or having children. It just feels like it was the right time for me. So even that, I think, is something that I now try to, like, it's okay to want other things at certain times. And funny enough, like you said, life always working out. It always works out that you get to the point where you're like, oh, I think I might want this now. But but it's okay. It's not, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not like broken to want to do other things at a time when society tells you should be.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that God tries to tell us, that we're good enough just as we are. Not having to be measured by anybody else's standards. Just who you are is good enough.
It's really important. And when you think about yourself, you know, when you sum up all the things that make you Linda, what have you come to believe are your gifts and talents? You know, what do you believe you as Linda are particularly good at?
I'm good at strategy, vision, strategy, and execution.
That's the textbook, Linda. that's the whole textbook. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a saying that I guess I'm paraphrasing here, but basically when people tell you you can't do something, just move out of the way. I'm gonna do it.
Yeah.
You know, so definitely by far my highest. Well, the biggest talent I think I have is definitely execution, making it happen.
Making it happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And you know, now you've written a book, right? I find that my favorite kind of people are people that won't be defined by one thing or won't be boxed into one thing. You know, you had the traditional law career, and then you were at LAS, then you have your own firm, but you also have a non-profit. Now you're writing a book, and I think that for me is what I would wish for everyone. It doesn't have to be, a book or whatever, but in your space, you can be a banker that bakes, that does this, that does that. Like just having a full experience of all the things you can explore is always something I try to encourage in people, but it's always my favorite kind of human, because I think you're multifaceted, right? So let's talk about your book, the title, which I absolutely love. Can't wait to have it in my hands. Women, Resilience, and the Will to Lead. Yeah, great title. When did you know it was time to put yourself, because I've read excerpts of the book, and it kind of goes back into your childhood, and so when did you feel it was time to put yourself out there in text, to immortalize yourself, for lack of a better term? When did you feel like it was time, and what was your intention for writing it? And when I read the book, or any of our viewers read it, or our listeners read it, what are you hoping they take away from your book?
Firstly, I'd like to comment on your point about limitations. One of my favorite quotations is by a lady called Lorraine Wagner. And it says, there's going to be plenty of people who can tell you what you can do. Don't limit yourself. So you shouldn't be defined by what other people think you can do. What your talents are, what your gifts are, and how you express them is completely between you and your God. That's what I believe.
Yeah.
But getting on to the book, I wrote it firstly for myself. It took me about 3 years on and off to write. And not because I was, it's not like a lengthy book or anything, but I had to think about it. It was really about sort of processing, okay, what happened? What just happened to me over a period of sort of seven years, I'd say, and just trying to sort of understand it and come to terms with where I am now and get to where I am now, because it was a very difficult journey. And I've just come out of a period in which I kind of lost myself. And I guess the book was about rediscovering who I am, and then using the story of my journey to try and encourage other women to step into leadership. Because, as I say, representation matters. But also, one of the arguments I make in the book is that the reason women are judged so harshly in leadership positions is because there's so few of us. And if more women, a critical mass of women, get into leadership, then all the external things such as appearance, is she married, the irrelevant things will fade into the distance, and people will look more at substance, because it won't be such a novelty anymore, because there'll be a substantive number of women at the table. But the other argument I make about representation mattering is that it's not just about the numbers. there's need for diversity of thought to help resolve the challenges that we face as humanity. And women bring that difference of opinion. Even within the group of women, there's diversity.
Yes.
So if you shut out that group from the decision-making arena, then you're removing possible solutions to challenges that we have. And that's an argument that so few people make, that why is it important to have women in leadership? As opposed to just ticking a box that, yes, we have them.
We had a guest earlier in the podcast who is, pretty high up corporate-wise in, organization, and he's always, he was actually my boss at one point, and it was always a big thing for him, for women to sit at the table. He always tried to create the environment, when he was like MD, I was his head of HR, so he intentionally always asked me a lot of questions about managing women. And I remember asking him why it's important to him, because it's something that came out very early, from the time when we were first having our first conversation as someone, when I just became his direct report, it came out very strongly that he believed in it. And his answer was, I was expecting something deeper, but his answer was very simple. He said, but the population, like women represent 50% of the population. So how can we not, right, have them making decisions? And in that moment, it kind of sounds like what you've said, to say we are here, we occupy, if not even more than 50% of the planet. How is that not represented, right? How are we not part of the solution? So it can also have all these other complex answers, but there's this also just very simple answer. Even anyone logical should really sit and think that makes sense, And the will to lead, I'm curious about that part of the title, because the women part makes sense, the resilience part makes sense. When we say the will, what do you mean by the will to lead?
In our society, culturally, we're told that the woman is the neck who turns the head.
Yes.
The neck being somewhat subservient to the neck, who decides what to do and has the vision, all those sort of things. So basically, the man should be in charge, and the woman should be in the background. And sometimes I wonder how I turned out the way I am, because my mother, who is a very powerful woman in her own right, often talks about, no, it's good to be in the background. But I'm like, well, what if you want to be out there in the front, making the decisions, challenging what's going on? You should have the right to do that and not feel restrained by society's views of women. So it's that. And then also the title actually is a play on the book Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg. So the full title of the book, Lean In, is Lean In, Women, Work, and the Will to Lead. And I was very inspired by the book. She got some very serious vitriol at some point, people rubbishing her work, but it made an impact on me. And I do cite parts of the book in my book as well. Because for me, it advocated for more women to sit at the table of influence, which is really important. And for all the reasons that we've just earlier discussed.
I remember that book was super life-changing for me, but the thing that I'll never forget is don't leave before you leave. Have to leave, or something like that.
Absolutely.
I think I paraphrase. And it's always easy to do that, she had this example about the girl who just got the boyfriend and was already scaling back, was getting, stopped and stopped showing up as much because she was preparing. She was already preparing for the babies and before the babies came. That was such like a loud bulb moment for me because I was like, why do we step back so early when you don't have to?
Absolutely.
You know, of course, when it's time to, you know, motherhood does like naturally, you know, you slow down. But when it happens, it does, you don't have to like procrastinate, think like, oh, in 3 years, you know, I want to have a baby, therefore I will stop, you know, showing up the way I show up before it happens, you know.
Absolutely.
That was life-changing
believer.
for me.
But I think it's something that we're all conditioned to do in some shape or form.
Yeah.
For example, for the longest time, I resisted building my own house. Because I was like, no, I'm just going to wait until what?
Until what?
I'm like, what?
Yes.
I'm like 45. I'm like, what? I'm going to build my house.
Yeah.
And so I built it.
Yes.
And now I'm like, wow, I love my house.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that I've done that I'm proudest of. I'm like, look what I made.
Look at what you made.
And yeah, sometimes we limit ourselves before we can actualize ourselves.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's really important not to do that.
I think it's a big thing, you know, sometimes it's building, but it's also things like travel, you know, it's like you travel when, you know, like when, and this is not necessarily getting on a plane. This is going to see the falls in Northern Province or something.
Exactly, yes.
Just do it. There's never going to be a time. It doesn't mean you can't wait for the partner or the husband. Then you have like how we've pictured it in our heads, how it's supposed to happen, because we don't know when that's all going to happen.
Absolutely.
It's not always in our control.
And as we were saying, everything happens as it should.
Yeah,
In
as it
God's
should.
time. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So a lot of people, you talked about visioning and execution. So a lot of people tend to have ideas, right? It's things that you might nurture it for a long time. You have ideas, you have thoughts, you know, it's even just speaking out to injustices, which I think, when I think about activism, I normally think about the things that I care deeply about, but sometimes I'm afraid to talk about because I just don't want to be the source of any controversy. And this is not just on social media, or it's even in our families, right? There's something that we feel strongly against, but because we rank somewhere in the family, we're always a little bit afraid to speak out to injustice, right? Like we lack the courage. That's the. So when you think about, you know, what you experience, and you were to give advice to a woman struggling to just find their voice, and you know, this doesn't have to be in big platforms. Like I said, even in families, in relationships, they don't even have to be romantic relationships. Sometimes it's with your parents, sometimes with your siblings. You know, what advice do you have to give with someone who is struggling to find their voice, and you know you have something to say because it bubbles inside, right? What advice would you have for someone who's just kind of struggling to speak out, especially against injustice?
For me, the biggest example of speaking truth when it matters is Jesus Christ. And as a Christian, I follow Christ.
Yeah.
So follow Christ's example. Speak the truth when it matters. We earlier talked about the fact that we mentioned Dr. Maya Angelou's quotation that without courage, you can't do any other virtue consistently.
Yeah.
So it's really important to have the courage of your convictions. And I think what we suffer from in our culture is we're very much a communal culture, that nobody wants to stand out from the group.
Yeah.
In order not to be ostracized, isolated, ridiculed.
Yeah.
You know, we want to move as a group.
As a pack.
As a pack, yes. And That's a good thing in many ways. Communities support each other, they nurture each other, but it can also have negative implications. But it's not even just in our culture. I think the Chinese, or the Japanese, forgive me, have a saying that the nail that sticks out has to be hammered down.
Back, yeah.
Yes. So it's something that exists in a lot of high cultures, respect cultures, such as ours. And many years ago, I wrote an article entitled, "Is African Culture Killing Our Race?" And it was an article in response to a conversation I had with a Tanzanian lady who was at the time talking about how people were disrespecting the person in power in her country, and that you should speak to elders in a certain way. Forget what they're doing, forget if they're corrupt, forget if they're being authoritarian, speak to them in a certain way. You can't challenge them. And I said, this is what is killing us as a people. This is why we're poor.
Yes.
Because when people are doing the wrong things, nobody wants to say anything about it. Hiding behind Boma ni Boma. Or this is a big person, whatever the situation is, and I think there are ways of addressing things respectfully, but just know that truth comes with a cost. That you can't run away from that, because even if you are being polite, respectful, but you're saying something that is exposing somebody, not everyone is going to like it. And for me as a Christian, I've had to make peace with that, because for me, truth is the higher value. So that's how I resolve it.
Truth comes with a cost. That's true. But I think silence also comes with a cost.
Absolutely.
Sometimes that's a bigger cost.
Absolutely, indeed. Definitely.
So right now we're living in an environment where diversity and inclusion is a big thing, As someone in HR, it's always a big part of my KPIs and things like that. And the frustrating part is that it's said, but it tends to be lip service quite a lot, And we've seen a rise of women in leadership, but now an article actually that was written by Lean.org was talking about how women are now leaving, especially post-COVID. Women are starting to take a step back from these high-pressure leadership positions once again. And now it's at a higher rate than ever. I think Lean.org did some study with McKinsey over time, and they found that women are now just like leaving positions or just dropping out. And I think I think a big part of it is also the environment. As much as we want women to come into leadership positions, the patriarchy, it's still the environments that were created by these patriarchal, structures. It's still the boys' club still it's the rules that the boys' club set. And I don't know if a lot of organizations have done a lot of work to change, to rethink or to change those environments. So when you, and this is something that I guess with your experience or off of the top of your head, what are some of the things, and we can limit them to 3, what are some of the 3 things that people in positions of influence, this could be in, the government sector, this could be in private institutions, this could be even in churches, whatever type of institution, what are 3 things you think both men and women can do better to just create environments where women feel safe to continue being a part of, they feel safe to thrive, they can rise and still have, lives at home. So what are 3 things you think institutions can do better?
I think firstly, there's a notion that both with women and men, that there's not enough for all of us, not enough to go around for all of us. And you see that demonstrated by, particularly in the modern age now, women have been progressing.
Yeah.
And sometimes men feel threatened by that and don't know how to situate themselves in an environment in which other women are thriving.
Yeah.
Also on the women's side, there can also be that sentiment that if a woman is doing well, it means I can't do well. So that's how people start slandering and name calling and all sorts of things like that. So firstly, there is room for everybody.
There is room for everybody.
And we all have different talents, different ways of expressing those talents, and all of those can be useful to help us progress as a society.
Yeah, I love that.
Then understand that representation does matter.
Yeah.
For the reasons we mentioned earlier. It's important to have a diversity of thought to help us understand and resolve the challenges we face as humanity.
Yeah.
And lastly, I'd say that gender equity as a principle is important because, as you mentioned, society is largely divided down the middle, and no one should be left behind.
Yeah.
That let's bring everybody
everyone
with us.
Yeah, love that. Okay, so you have done quite, you've had like great achievements so far, and I know there are things you're still yet to achieve. So what are some of the things that you're still looking forward to? And what does rest look like for you, first of all, in this right now? How do you rest? And I used to ask people, when do you retire? But I keep getting the answer like, never. So like, what does that look like for you? Do you envision retiring, or what does rest long term and rest now look like?
Actually, I'm terrible at resting because I am, and I'm not advocating for this at all. I'm very much a type A personality, very driven, very ambitious, very focused, hardworking.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't stop when I should.
Yeah.
Back to my friend Natasha Chumia, she's great at setting her boundaries. And it's something I really am trying to learn how to do because it's so important. Just the other day, I said, I sent her a link to this new networking organization for women.
Yeah.
I said, Natasha, these are our people. And she wrote back and she said, yeah, these are our people, but I can't do this now because I'm already on another platform. So she set the boundary that she can't stretch herself too thin. And I was like, yeah, okay.
She's probably right.
So boundaries are really important. I'm learning that because I have suffered burnout previously. In fact, I've just recovered from it. And I would not wish that on anybody. But perhaps, it was also due to the fact that I was starting a new organization that was starting from scratch, creating everything from scratch. And, I've read a lot about founders and entrepreneurs, and it sounds like that's the playbook.
Yeah.
It's just hard.
Yeah.
And so, I'm glad I've reached a stage where things seem to be balancing out. And now I can concentrate more on my self-care, which is really important. But yeah, I am trying to prioritize rest more.
Yeah.
And one of the the beauty about being able to run your own organization is that you can model flexibility not just for yourself,
Yeah.
but also for the people that
Yeah.
work with you.
Yeah.
So I think it's very important to have that balance. And perhaps that's the reason why women are leaving these high positions now, because now that COVID's over, people are being told to go back to the office.
Yeah.
And so they're losing that balance that they had when they were able to juggle.
To be flexible. And
exactly.
yeah.
Although I'm completely speculating here.
Yeah, no, it's a big thing, because I've seen that with my friends and even with the employees where I work, is that the flexibility, and even now when we're negotiating contracts, that's now a thing. It's now a thing that people will ask, how do you work? Is it hybrid? Is it who sets the hours? Which are the hours? Like before, it wasn't a thing, but now you negotiate that into your contract. So you can see that, and more for women, actually. Women will tell you, I want, and I love that they will boldly say, right now, I want to spend more time with my kids. So, I want to be home. I want to work from home. So I do think that that has played a role. Yeah, we're speculating, but if we did a bit of research, I think we'll find that. We'll find that there. Yeah. So we have a bit like at the end of every show, we try and surprise our guest a little. Yeah, it's not all the time. I think it's just it's a personal thing. After every time I interview someone, I always ask them if they have any questions, because it always just feels really weird to just ask, and someone doesn't get to reciprocate. So we try to limit it to 3 questions, but 2 or 1 is okay. But we try and turn the tables a little and have the interviewee ask me questions. So, like I said, max of 3. It can be 2, it can be 1. But Linda, do you have any questions for me?
What is your aspiration for the Talent Whisperer?
My aspiration for the Talent Whisperer is that it gets to reach people that don't normally have the access to these types of conversations because of their environment, or because they just don't have the role models. So one of the things I've tried to do is be very intentional about the type of guests, because I think sometimes when you focus too much on celebrity, it still feels a bit far away from someone. I think one of the reasons that I've been able to achieve what I achieved was access to people that were doing well. I had access to cousins' friends, and I could ask the questions myself. And I think they gave me advice that was really amazing and stellar. So I think my aspiration is that the Talent Whisperer gets more reach, especially to people that never really had the access to ask people like you questions and see that you're also just a human being and it's possible. So I think it's reach. It's reach, but not just reach in forms of like likes and but reach that has impact. So that's a huge aspiration for me. Yeah.
What do you know for sure?
Ooh, that's a great question, and as an Oprah fan, how come I've never really thought about it? What I know for sure is that it'll all be okay. I think I'm a Christian too, and I've battled in my faith, because when bad things happen, I've always wondered where God is, but somehow it always becomes okay. So what I know for sure is that it will be okay. And even when I'm going through something, I've tried to start to respect time, because I know what I'm going through now is not permanent, and it will be okay. So I think that's something that I've come to lean on, especially in this season where I feel I'm transitioning and nothing feels familiar anymore. I lean on the fact that it will all be okay. Yeah.
And what will you do for your next birthday?
I was thinking about this. My next birthday is quite significant because
I thought so.
yeah, it's my 37th birthday.
Okay.
But also it's significant because my dad passed away at the age of 37. So it's a date that has just it's a year that or an age that has just never left the back of my brain. So what I'm going to do, I think it will be very self-centered. I think I'm going to. I don't think I'm going to have a party. I love parties, but I don't think I'm going to have a party. I was thinking about this and I was like, what would I do to honor? What's the big thing I can do to honor myself? Because I think for me it's a milestone. It's a big deal. So I don't have the thing yet, but the thing will be a very selfish but also gratitude-filled thing. So I don't know yet. I don't know yet. But it's heavy on my mind because it's a big birthday for me. Yeah.
Well, I hope you find something that honors your dad's memory.
Yeah.
And that fulfills you as well.
Yes, that's definitely the goal. So I'm trying to go inward because I'm very extroverted. So I'm always thinking about how everyone kind of fits in. So for this one, I'm trying to go inward a lot. I have 7 months. So it's a good time to plan. Yeah. Great question. And thank you, Linda. This was an amazing conversation. I really enjoyed not only meeting you in person, but just talking to you. I think you are, you know, when you meet, they say don't meet your heroes. And yeah, I think you've turned out even better than I thought you would. Yeah.
Thanks.
I think you're much more, you know, I would say the word is well-rounded. You know, like the persona you get on like, I guess, following you on LinkedIn and is your activist side. So it always feels really, really serious. So I love that you're just this like amazing, chilled, well-rounded human. So this has been really cool.
Thank you. I continue to do the work.
Yeah, we all do. Yeah, thank you, Linda.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
The one thing I forgot to ask is where do we get your book? I'm waiting, and I'm on Audible, I'm on Kindle. I like my physical book. So like, where do we get your book?
At the moment, we're accepting pre-orders. You can find the link on my website, which is lindakasonde.com.
Okay.
And was it .org? Anyway, Google Linda Kasonde website, you'll find it.
Yeah.
And also on all my social media pages, you can find the link to pre-order that. So it will also be available on the bookshops, but I haven't yet concluded that at the moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, it'll be 350 kwacha. So
nice. We already have a price.
Yes, we do. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to chatting with you after you've read the book.
Yeah, I'm definitely reading it. So I'll send you. I'm the voice note queen, so I'll probably send you voice notes as I read it. But also, it'll be nice to have a conversation about it after. Great. Okay. So thank you so much for watching another episode of The Talent Whisperer. I hope you're as inspired by this conversation as I am. If you enjoyed it, make sure you like and you subscribe on all our different platforms. So until the next time, bye.